Ever since their conception in 1984, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise has blossomed into one of the most recognizable franchises worldwide. In my own experience, growing up, there wasn't a single kid who was not familiar with the high-flying, pizza-loving Teenage Turtles and their adventures. While the primary cast of the series is unforgettable, I think the genius of Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird shows how they treated their side characters. The best example of this are the part Rhino, part Man Rocksteady, and his partner in crime, Bebop, who's half man, half Warthog. Over the years, these two individuals have surprisingly received numerous layers and depths to their character, depending on who's writing the story. We've seen them change from more comic relief to misunderstood beings that have been shaped by the society around them, as much as the mutagen that caused their transformation. So, join me in today's video with a hot pepperoni pizza as we dive into these two iconic side characters and rediscover the various ways in which they've been portrayed across multiple shows and films over the years. Remember, this video will contain some minor spoilers. With that out of the way, all I gotta say is, Cowabunga, gang. Jump for it! How were Bebop and Rocksteady first introduced? I was rewatching the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle cartoon that came out all the way back in 1987 for this video, and there were several things that crossed my mind. Unlike many of the animated shows that we cover in this channel, the first TMNT cartoon was most definitely a kid's show. Don't get me wrong, while the animation has aged poorly and the script is full of campy humor, it has its own place and charm even today. The reason I bring this up is because this overall vibe carries over to the characters that we see throughout the series, from the Turtles to Shredder and everyone else in between. In fact, if you joined the Ninja Turtles fanbase much later and hadn't watched the 80s series, you would never guess that Bebop and Rocksteady make their appearance right in the very first episode. April O'Neil is out and about trying to cover a story regarding a sudden spree of crime involving the looting of companies dealing in scientific equipment. As she and her TV crew wait at the location of the next company that might be targeted, they're confronted by a group of thugs. Seeing them, April's crew runs away, abandoning her to their mercy. However, thinking fast on her feet, she manages to give them the slip and escapes into the sewers below. The thugs soon follow her down into the sewer, but right before they're able to hurt April, she's rescued by our boy. Looking at these thugs, they didn't stand out in any way, shape, or form to me back when I first watched it. They look like your average filler characters that you find in most animated shows and movies. However, with the power of hindsight, this time around, I knew that the African character with the over-the-top purple mohawk wearing the red jacket was none other than Bebop, and the bulky Caucasian with a tuft of blonde hair on his head wearing a brown half jacket was none other than Rocksteady himself. These two recurring villains of the series had always been in plain sight right from day one. This was, in fact, the very first time they had been introduced to the audience, although it would take another episode for them to become the villains that we're familiar with. I know some people might say this isn't their official introduction, but in my eyes it is. Looking back, no one would ever have guessed that these absolutely insignificant lowlife would become such recognizable faces in the franchise. Where do they become mutants? After his robotic foot ninjas are defeated by the Turtles, Shredder cannot stand the fact that they were bested by mere turtle. Allow me to clarify for the uninitiated that the term foot here is actually the name of Shredder's ninja clan, not to be confused with the term foot soldier. It comes to light that Shredder was not working alone all this time. In fact, the evil ninja overlord is shown to be in cahoots with an extra-dimensional sentient brain alien called Krang, who wishes to unleash his forces upon the Earth with Shredder's aid. I have to say, TMNT had some very creative character designs. I mean, it took Gege Akutami another couple decades to make a sentient brain who could be taken as a credible threat. You all know what I'm talking about, my fellow Jujutsu Kaisen fan. Moving on, let me get back to how Rocksteady and Bebop became the monsters that we know them to be. Krang had begun to grow increasingly frustrated with Shredder's failure to deliver his end of the bargain. The show suggests that Oroku used the same mutagen that he had used to attempt Splinter's murder, before it transformed his rival into a rat instead. Yeah, that incident during which the Turtles and their master transformed into their current form was no accident after all. However, this time around, instead of applying the mutagen to his adversaries who'd already been transformed by it, Krang tells Shredder to use it on his own subordinates. Struck by the genius of this plan, Shredder realizes that all he needs to do is to have his lackeys be near a powerful animal before exposing them to the mutagen. This is because the mutagen transformed the individual into whichever animal they had been closest to before they were exposed to the chemical. In this way, he would have his own army of mutant thugs who could rival the Turtles and their master. I still sometimes think about why didn't Shredder choose something like a shark or a crocodile instead of a warthog for poor Bebop. I understand that it had to do with creative choices, but wouldn't any other predator have been much more powerful and fear-inspiring? It's funny how when Shredder approaches them looking for volunteers, the two are the least interested, even when he offers them superhuman strength and powers beyond their wildest dream. However, when he mentions that it would grant them the power to take out the Turtles, they immediately agree, without even listening to what the actual experiment entails. Soon, the two stooges are bound to their chairs as Shredder approaches them with the mutagen and the two animals he had hijacked from the New York Zoo. By this time, Dumb and Dumber begin to realize they might have signed up for something that was not entirely what they were promised. While all this is happening, Shredder manages to kidnap Splinter and lures the Turtles to his mobile lair of the Technodrome. Once outside, the group fights through the gauntlet of enemies that include ninja robots, machines, and other thugs. However, just as they're about to rescue their master, Shredder appears before them and unveils the fruits of his experiment. Rocksteady and Bebop appear for the first time in their mutated form, and just let me tell you, the way that they look, getting a date would be the least of their worries. Rocksteady now looks like a humanoid Rhino, while Bebop is taking the appearance of a half-man, half-warthog. It's clear that these two are no longer ordinary thugs, as their powers have been exponentially increased to that of their hybrid animal. Thankfully though, while their powers have increased, their IQ still remains woefully lacking. The Turtles eventually outsmart the duo and put an end to their debut rampage. Compared to some of their later depictions, the two villains are super goofy and comical in their first appearance. I think them turning into hybrids actually did them a favor, because at least now they're stronger, unlike before when they were just stupid. How did Archie Comics expand their story? Seeing just how successful the TV series was going, Archie Comics would step in and begin publishing the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics from 1988. I guess since the TV show had already done so much of the groundwork regarding the lore and setting, the comics borrows several of these things from it. By the time the 5th issue had been published, I found out that the co-creators of TMNT, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, had already handed over the reins of their creation to the folks at Archie Comics. What this allowed the comic to do was to create their own original stories that would greatly expand on the TMNT franchise. I think I don't need to point out the fact that this would obviously mean that Rocksteady and Bebop would have their characters developed further as well. For the most part, the Archie comics continue to use them as comic relief and don't really do anything crazy with their characters. For instance, after being trapped in Dimension X along with Shredder by Krang, they're tormented by the evil brain for his own personal pleasure. The reasoning behind it is obviously hilarious, as Krang states that he loves tormenting men and beasts, which made Rocksteady and Bebop perfect because they were both. I think you get the gist. These two continued to be absolute clowns, pulling stupid stunts like punching and knocking each other out in an attempt to convince Krang that they could do ninja stuff too. Don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining here. This was the role that they were given by the first TV show, and the people at Archie Comics ran with it. My personal favorite moment, however, has to be in issue 13, where the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles find themselves trapped in Dimension X, where they're forced to take part in a gladiatorial game alongside Shredder, Rocksteady, Bebop, and other creatures. Once the games are ended, the villains are transported to various places. For instance, Krang finds himself stranded in a planet used to dump toxic material, and Shredder is placed behind bars on Earth. What happens to Bebop and Rocksteady, you ask? The not-so-dynamic duo are both teleported to an alien planet with only wildlife on it. There they are seen finally accepting their animalistic nature and sprinting along wild and carefree with the rest of the horde. Honestly, if there was ever a happy ending for these characters, this had to be the one. The irony lies in the fact that it was meant to be their punishment. This is at least what I believe in my headcanon to be true, considering the fact that the two disappear from the main storyline after this. What is their darkest comic origin? Over the years, there have been around 5 different comic book series in the entire Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles publication history. My favorite out of all of these has to be the IDW run, following the franchise's sale to Nickelodeon. Why I love this series is because it provides a far more gritty and darker reimagining of the TMNT story, and its characters. Gone is the campy vibes of the Archie Comics run, which is replaced by a brutal and much more mature imagery. Bebop and Rocksteady are introduced to us in their latest avatar, in the final panel of the 25th issue of the series, but we wouldn't get into a detailed origin story until much later. In the Micro-Villains series, in issue number 7, the veil would finally drop on Bebop and Rocksteady's origin story, and boy, it really had me hooked. In this version, Bebop and Rocksteady are 2 lowlives who have named themselves after music genres, believing them to be cool gag names. However, Rocksteady and Bebop are both consummate losers. who had been kicked out of every single street gang until they had nowhere else to go. From the get-go, you get this almost tragic sense of identity crisis and a desperate longing to belong from these two characters. Having hit an absolute rock bottom, their luck finally changes when they're introduced to the Foot Clan by an acquaintance. Convinced that the Foot Clan was the coolest gang in New York, the two become fanatically loyal to the group. Not out of a desire to grow stronger or richer or even more powerful, but purely to finally belong someplace where they wouldn't be thrown out. This is why when Shredder's granddaughter Karai brings up the opportunity for them to rise in the Foot's ranks by taking part in an experiment, the two don't hesitate even for a second. They even battled the remaining thugs in their group to prove themselves worthy for this opportunity. I think the contrast between the 80s TV show, where they were almost tricked into volunteering, and here, where they fight desperately to be picked and even go so far as being excited about their transformations, adds more gravity to their whole character. The irony of losing themselves in order to finally be accepted by others is some seriously deep storytelling in my opinion. And in the Archie Comics version, the two were powerful but dumb. And here, they're stupid and dangerous, which is a deadly combination if you understand the difference. While their low IQ was used to make them comic relief characters here, their stupidity is used to show how deadly they can be, as there are no limits they won't cross to serve the Foot Clan in order to belong. Unlike the bumbling idiots, these two are brutal, even massacring an entire unit of Foot Clan ninjas with deadly force. I think this is one of the darkest and deadliest avatars of Rocksteady and Bebop because their motivation here goes far beyond just defeating the turtle. How does the 2012 series build their origin? Out of all the origin stories for Rocksteady and Bebop, I think the 2012 3D animated series provides the one that diverges the most from the established lore. In this series, we actually get the names of Rocksteady and Bebop before they adopted these gimmicky names. I think it's important to note that these two characters are quite different from the other versions, both in terms of their personalities and their backgrounds. Before becoming Rocksteady, Ivan Staranko was a Russian arms dealer who had traded with Shredder for a long time. However, he makes the fatal mistake of crossing the Master Ninja's path when he employs a high-tech thief called Anton Zek, an African-American thief, to steal Shredder's helmet. The city of New York is overrun by aliens from Dimension X, and with supplies dwindling, the only hope that these two have to escape the city is to cut a deal with Shredder. However, thanks to their past indiscretions, the hopes of that happening is second to none. In a moment of brilliance, the two decide to take Shredder's daughter Karai, who had been exposed to the mutagen in return for safe passage. Yet Karai is the Shredder's daughter here instead of his granddaughter. Her relationship with him changes depending on the adaptation. I think the fact that these two usually dim-witted stooges are actually capable of forming a coherent plan actually sets them apart from the other versions of their characters. Yeah, Rocksteady and Bebop are still not the brightest bulbs in the room, but they're far more smart and cunning than the Archie Comics or the IDW versions. Unfortunately for the duo, despite their smarts, the deal with Shredder falls through when it is interrupted by the Ninja Turtles. Having let his daughter slip from his grasp again, Shredder turns his fury towards Staranko and Anton. Once again, their origin story radically diverges from the previous stories that I've discussed earlier. In the original series and the Archie Comics version, despite their late realization, they actually volunteer. While in the IDW continuity, they're willing participants knowing the full scope of the situation. In the 2012 series, I liked the fact that they showed them as being actually reluctant and scared of what was going to happen to them. At no point in the story do the two villains actually volunteer for this procedure. This is shown by the fact they have to be literally tossed into the mutagenic tub by Shredder's henchmen in this story. I think it actually makes sense because, considering the fact that they actually have some IQ in this version, no one in their right mind would subject themselves to such an experiment willingly. I think the fact that we actually get their names and somewhat fleshed out personalities makes their transformation here even more impactful to the audience. While I'm not a big fan of their 3D animated shows, I think the 2012 series did a fairly good job, at least in regard to showing us a unique take on the origins of Rocksteady and Bebop. How are they adapted in live action? Between watching Megan Fox out ninjaing the ninjas and Shredder being ping-ponged across dimensions, there are very few things in the live action film TMNT Out of the Shadows that came out in 2016 that it gets right for me. Following Shredder's defeat in the first film, he's being transferred to another facility alongside two other inmates. The Foot Clan decides to use this opportunity to break their incarcerated master out with the help of the mad scientist Baxter Stockman. Aiding him in this escape are his fellow inmates Rocksteady, played by the wrestler Sheamus, and Bebop. Fortunately, April O'Neil, played by Fox, has been doing some ninja business as she informs the Turtles about Shredder's escape. Even as the Ninja Turtles are about to capture their nemesis, he is accidentally teleported to Dimension X Space by Baxter Stockman. There, he encounters Krang for the first time and receives from the alien the mutagen that allows him to transform people into human-beast hybrid. Once back on Earth, Shredder recruits the two thugs who were more than eager to follow him without question. After arriving at Baxter's lab, he injects the two with the mutagen, transforming them into the mutants that we're familiar with. Once again, April manages to be more of a ninja by sneaking into the facility and stealing the remaining mutagen. I know we're supposed to suspend our sense of disbelief when watching a film like this, but would you see things like this, followed by Baxter coming up with another scientific theory to explain the transformation? I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Apparently, the reason that the two transformed into a Warthog and a Rhino is because within all humans there's a dormant gene that ties us to our animal ancestors, which the mutagen had helped to become active again. There's also the fact that Rocksteady is not a blonde, he's a redhead. I'm sorry, I know that at this point I'm literally nitpicking things, but here's one saving grace in the entire movie. I think Rocksteady and Bebop are actually the only good things to come out of this film, especially after listening to the interviews about how the actual actors who played the Turtles were allegedly treated behind the scenes. They at least remain their blessed, idiotic, and violent selves, like in the rest of the adaptation. What changes in Mutant Mayhem? The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem animated film once again flips the script on the way these two characters are portrayed. I, for one, kind of like it. It's a certainly more interesting concept, which brings something fresh to these villains. Unlike the other stories where Rocksteady and Bebop are nothing more than dim-witted lackeys who are transformed from humans into these hybrid monsters, the Mutant Mayhem plot reimagines their origins in an interesting way, in my opinion. You see, in this story, these anthropomorphic goons are not humans who've been transformed by a mutagen. They're actually part of an experiment by Baxter Stockman, who uses his mutagen to mutate existing animals into anthropomorphs. In this way, Rocksteady and Bebop are already animals who simply gained sentience and became evolved thanks to the mutagen altering them genetically. I love the fact that they're not just two dim-witted thugs here. They're actually part of a tragic story where they're ostracized by a society who can't see past their appearance. This has led them to follow their father, Superfly, one of Baxter's earliest experiments, who rescues the two and others like them following the scientist's death. Owing much to Superfly for rescuing and nurturing them, the two, along with the rest of their sibling, follow their leader in his quest to establish a mutant domination over Earth. I think the choice of giving them such a human reason for their motivation plays beautifully when put up against their fully animalistic origins. The animated film doesn't need to use some mumbo-jumbo to attempt to reimagine a storied franchise and its beloved character. There's also the fact that the two characters are voiced by John Cena, who lends his vocals to Rocksteady, and Bebop, who's played by Seth Rogen. I think Mutant Mayhem manages to give us something genuinely new while staying true to the thematic roots of these characters brilliantly. In my opinion, Rocksteady and Bebop, through their various avatars across the years, stand as a testament of how even side characters can become synonymous with our show. These two characters have entertained us from our childhood all the way to our adult lives with their antics. As time has passed, a lot of depth and layer has been added to their characters, making them much more than your average caricature thugs that they initially started off as. Which version of Rocksteady and Bebop do you like the best? Tell me in the comments below. For now, it's time for me to say goodbye. I hope to see you in the next one.